Hey folks, this is Aestus from Aestus Guides, back again with another class revisited video. We are going to be talking about the Druid. In particular, we're going to be talking about how it has changed with this last patch, patch 9, and the addition of level 5. I have made a video covering the Druids levels 1 through 4. It is still good, I recommend you see it. This video is just to talk about how my opinions in that video changed with the addition of this patch. So, I can just tell you at the outset, we're going to be covering 3 things with the Druid class. First, and most importantly, we'll be talking about the addition of 3rd level spells. This has been the biggest change in this patch for all of the spellcasting classes. The Druid is no exception. I think you'll be surprised to see how the Druid spells are used optimally in this patch. After that, we'll be talking about Wildshaping and how I hate it. Really, I'm disillusioned with Wildshaping this patch. I think it's not good, and part of that is Larian was obviously rushed and they didn't introduce any new Wildshapes with this level, but another part of it is ways that Larian's decided to implement it, which I think really hurt the Druid class, so we'll talk about that. And then last, we'll talk about changes to the subclasses. The balance of the subclasses has shifted in this patch, so we'll cover that, and then we'll give it an overall ranking. Let us start with spells. We'll level up my Druid character to level 5 here. So, as you can see, we get 3rd level spells, and this is the entire 3rd level spell selection that you get from the base Druid class. It is just 6 spells, which is extremely lackluster. We can talk about most of these. Some of these we have talked about, I believe. Protection from Energy is a concentration spell that gives resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage. Pretty good, but it requires concentration. And it points back to a problem I talked about in the original Druid video, which is that Druids get a lot of good spells, but all of their best spells compete for concentration. And it really sucks because you don't have a lot of versatility. You end up kind of picking a spell to make your build around. Usually for me that's Flame Blade. And then that's it. You don't get to explore many of the other options of the Druid class. And then good situational spells like Protection from Energy kind of fall to the wayside. The same goes for Sleet Storm. Sleet Storm is a AoE control effect that requires concentration. In an area, you douse all fires, create an icy surface, which enemies can trip on when they move. And the important thing is it disrupts the concentration of spellcasters without a save. Theoretically very strong, but again, it requires concentration. Still worth casting if you are fighting a character who's really hit you with a devastating concentration spell, maybe something like Hold Person. But at the cost of a concentration, you're just not using this that often on the Druid. Daylight, Feign Death are just kind of meh spells, not really worth talking about for them. I will be making a video that cover all the spells, so I have to save some of my opinions for that. But that leaves the unique spells that Druids get access to, which are Call Lightning and Plant Growth. No other classes get these. So we can talk about them in a little more detail, starting with Call Lightning. Call Lightning is a small area of effect, save attack spell. It calls down a lightning bolt that hurts everyone in a 2-meter radius. It does 3d10 lightning damage. If they fail a dex save, half as much if they succeed. And it requires concentration. It requires concentration because for the next 10 turns, at the cost of just an action, you can recast this spell. So it's not taking another spell slot, just an action. So for the cost of 1 spell slot, you're getting 10 turns of this cast. The balance is that the damage is not that great for a 3rd level spell. 3d10 lightning damage is a little lackluster. However, getting it over multiple turns is great. If you add up all the damage it could possibly do over 10 turns, it is insane damage efficiency for its spell slot, especially when you factor in that it is dealing lightning damage. That's damage you can double very easily with the wet condition. So Call Lightning should be, I think, in a balanced patch, a really, really reliable damage spell for the Druid. Kind of pointing back to the strategy of Druids in the original Baldur's Gate game. You just call down lightning and zap everyone and do insane damage, and it's really fun to do, and it should be a reliable strategy. The damage numbers we're seeing would put the Druid in a kind of pinch hitter striker position. You know, they're not competing with the best strikers in the game, but they're dealing pretty good damage for a character that's also bringing control and support spells. That said, in this patch, there are just better options for dealing damage on the Druid, which we will talk about in a bit, and as a result, I almost never cast Call Lightning. There are always better spells to cast. Next up is Plant Growth. Plant Growth is a kind of like an improved version of... It is an improved version of Entangle. You're going to... It's a ground effect in a 6 meter radius, which is a bigger radius than Entangle. You're going to be summoning a bunch of weeds, which quarter the movement of anyone moving through them. That's, again, an improvement to Entangle, which only halves. Quartering enemy movement is a lot, so theoretically this would be really good for ranged kiting compositions. You cast Plant Growth, you maybe stack it with another ground effect, you shoot arrows at the enemies that are just slowly crawling towards you. And that is a really, really strong strategy in general. However, in this patch, as I've said many times, if you've watched all my other revisited videos, this is not a ranged composition kiting patch at all. The dominant strategy is to just cast haste on your melee strikers, run all over the map, and hit everyone with your swords, and Plant Growth kind of gets in the way of that. Also, I find that ground effects do not stack well in Baldur's Gate 3. They never have in any patch. I would love to stack Plant Growth with Spike Growth, to be honest. Quartering their movement, having that, or maybe it's having and then quartering that, I'm not sure how it would go. Either way, their movement is absolutely decimated, and they're taking damage trying to move out of it. It should be an extremely strong strategy, except I find that when you cast 2 ground effects, the second one usually just supersedes the first, and that sucks. So until they fix that, or until we get a balanced patch where ranged kiting compositions are worth using, Plant Growth is, again, just a spell I don't cast that often. And that is all of the Druid spells at level 3. You may have noticed that I've said that pretty much none of these are worth casting except for very situational uses of Protection from Energy and Sleet Storm. So then what are we using our 3rd level spell slots for? We're using them to upcast our 2nd level spells. That's the predominant way that I do it, and in particular I'm using them to cast Moonbeam probably 80% of the time. Why Moonbeam? Well, Moonbeam is bugged this patch so that it no longer requires concentration. I mean, kind of. It's a little weird. It's a bug, so it's hard to really say exactly how it works, but the gist is you can cast Moonbeam and also concentrate on another spell, as I will demonstrate in a bit. And this is why I never cast Call Lightning, really, because Moonbeam is another concentration spell. When upcast, it does 3d10 radiant damage, and as an action, you can move Moonbeam, similarly to how, as an action, you could recast Call Lightning. Moving it functions pretty much the same, because when you move it to a new target, it will proc damage onto them. And then also, when that target starts their turn in the Moonbeam, they're going to take another proc of damage. So that 3d10 radiant damage is actually doubled. It's 6d10. That means Moonbeam is doing just as much damage as Call Lightning if Call Lightning was hitting a wet target, except you don't need to bother spending actions and spell slots, casting Create Water. It just always works. So, functionally, the way Druids are playing in this patch is you are casting Moonbeam pretty much every fight, either as a 2nd or a 3rd level spell, and then you are casting another concentration damage spell, which will utilize your bonus action, and we have 3 options for that: Flame Blade, Flaming Sphere, Heat Metal. You can go watch my original Druid video where I talk about all 3 of these. The gist is that Heat Metal is the best, but very situational. Flaming Spear is weird. I honestly don't mess around with it much because I don't like the implementation. Still a very, very strong spell. It's S tier for sure. But I prefer to cast Flame Blade, mostly because while it is less damage than Flame Spear, it is infinite. It lasts until your next long rest rather than 10 turns. And how Flame Blade works is you will summon a Flaming Scimitar and shift it to your offhand, and then combine that with the Circlet of Fire to attack with it twice in a round. So altogether, you're going to be getting 2 procs of damage from Moonbeam, and then 2 attacks with your offhand weapon Flameblade, and that is the Druid in this patch. It is a striker. I'm going to show you, actually, how this works, just to prove it to you. As you can see, my character right now has summoned the Flameblade, which he's wielding in his offhand, and that means if Moonbeam was not bugged, when I cast it, it should immediately dispel the Flameblade. Watch. Flameblade's still up, and I can move this around and still make a bonus action attack. You get the idea. So stacking these 2 spells is the dominant strategy for Druids in this patch, and it's kind of the reason why I postponed this video. If you were watching before, I was going to group the Druid in with the Cleric and the Bard, the other support classes, but I kind of discovered this bug and it completely threw me for a loop, and I really needed more time to play around with the Druid, test this bug, and allow that to inform my ranking. So basically what this means is the Druid is now a striking class in this patch, which means we can compare its striking capabilities with other strikers. And let's do that now. I've graphed the damage that this class does on average and compared it to the Berserker. So here's the graph. The orange line that you see is this Druid build when it is able to cast both Moonbeam and Flameblade at the same time. Basically, I just took the Striker Druid build that longtime followers of mine will be familiar with, and added damage from Moonbeam every round. Just some limitations of this build. I only calculated for Moonbeam when it isn't upcast, and if it's hitting a single target, so just 2 procs. Realistically, you'll be upcasting Moonbeam a fair amount, and you can expect to be hitting more than 1 target on occasion, so that will boost its damage. And here I've compared it to, as I said, the Berserker. The blue line that you're looking at is a standard Berserker, and the gray line is when the Berserker is hasted. In the range of ACs that you could expect to be fighting, or that you would expect to care about, roughly in the 13 to 20 range, you can see from the graph that the Striker Druid compares pretty well to the Berserker, especially when you consider that the Berserker is the premier DPS class, and all it really does is DPS, whereas the Druid is bringing other support and control spells to your party. So the takeaway from this is that Druids right now, when you're abusing Moonbeam and Flameblade, are pretty good off DPS characters, but because they do not benefit well from haste, they fall short of being in that premier class of strikers, which are Berserkers, Paladins, and of course, Battle Masters. One thing to keep in mind, and you may have saw this if you were watching the video rather than just listening, whenever you stack Moonbeam with Flameblade, when the duration runs out on Moonbeam, Flameblade will also run out. The best I could figure is that these 2 concentrations are mixing together, and so whenever your quote-unquote concentration drops for Moonbeam, which it does at the end of 10 rounds, your concentration also drops on Flameblade, which shouldn't happen. It should last until your next long rest, but that's just the way the bug is interacting. So keep that in mind. It may not be worth casting Moonbeam every single fight if you just want to keep your Flameblade up. You can still use a combination of Shillelagh plus Flameblade in the offhand, which is still pretty good. So that's it for spells. Now let's talk about Wildshapes. As I said earlier, I am really disappointed with Wildshapes in this patch, and the biggest thing is their interaction with spells. Of course, rules as written in Tabletop 5e, you cannot cast spells while in Wildshape. However, you can maintain concentration while in Wildshape, and my experience at various tables, both playing and DMing, is that that's kind of the main feature of Druids, where because so much of their spell list is concentration spells, you pick your favorite, you cast it, and then you're going to Wildshape, so you're getting a spell effect even while Wildshaped. Actually, I remember one of the first tables I played at after 5e was released. I was not a druid, I was a cleric, but one of my friends was playing a druid, and one of his favorite strategies was to cast Flameblade and then wild shape into a panda bear. He reasoned, and our DM allowed it because it was hilarious. Pandas have opposable thumbs, therefore they should be able to wield weapons. And that was his way of getting the effects of Flameblade while wild-shaped. But even if you couldn't do that with Flameblade, you could do it with other spells, like Call Lightning, for example. Call Lightning is a concentration spell. You should be able to cast it, morph into a bear, and still reactivate it, because reactivating it isn't casting the spell. It's not taking a spell slot. And to me, that's what casting a spell should be. It should be something that costs a spell slot. The actual spell slot cost came before you wild shaped, right? I think that's reasonable, but as you can see, as I'll show you right now, if I cast Moonbeam, I'm just going to switch into turn-based mode here. Now I'm going to wild shape into a Deep Wrath. Now, Moonbeam does not go away, so that is working as intended, but look what I cannot do. I can't move Moonbeam around. If I'd cast Call Lightning instead of Moonbeam, I couldn't reactivate Call Lightning. If I turn back into a person, you can see here, look, I can move my Moonbeam around. Or I could if I didn't run out of actions for the turn. Hopefully you can see what I'm trying to say here. Some spells effectively don't work whenever you're wild shaped, and they're the spells that you really want in this patch, i.e. Moonbeam. If you can't move Moonbeam around, you're not getting a lot of effect out of it. It's basically like a worse Cloud of Daggers. You have to push targets into it. That means to get the full effect of the Moonbeam stacking with Flameblade or any other spell that you have to stay in human form. You can't wild shape. And that means I'm just not wild shaping very often. I will occasionally wild shape into a wolf to get Exposing Bite. But that just because Exposing Bite is such a good ability. But that's it. That's the extent of wild shaping in this patch, as far as I can see for optimal play. And that's a real shame. If Larian fixed it so that you could move Moonbeam while in wild shape, or that you could recast Call Lightning while in wild shape, I do not think it would break this class, and it would be a lot more fun. So Larian, if you're listening to this, could you maybe do that on full release of the game? I at least would really appreciate it. That is it for wild shaping, and all that leaves left to talk about is subclasses. And actually, we can transition to this pretty easily, because hopefully you could see how wild shaping being bad, what that would mean for the subclasses. It means that Circle of the Moon is not really a good choice, and also because Circle of the Moon just doesn't get anything at level 5, whereas Circle of the Land does. So let's jump back into the level up screen. We're back at level up now. This is a Circle of the Land Druid, and you can see at level 5 we are getting to pick another terrain type. And if you've watched my original Druid video, you know that terrain types give you bonus spells. So, we can scroll through. You can see if you pick Arctic, you get Sleet Storm and Haste. Coast, you get Sleet Storm, Call Lightning. Desert, you get Protection from Energy, Hypnotic Pattern. You get the idea. Of course, as always, when we get bonus spells, we want to prioritize good spells that we wouldn't otherwise get access to in the Druid spell list. So, for example, if I pick Coast, I would get bonus Sleet Storm and Call Lightning, but both of those are things I already have access to, so there isn't as much value from picking Coast as something else. The standouts in this patch are Arctic and Grassland. Arctic's a little bit better, but the reason these are standouts is because they give you access to Haste. So yes, we do have at least one support class in this patch that can cast the premier supporting spell, that is Haste. It's the Druid, albeit only if you pick the Circle of the Land subclass, and right now in the game there's no reason to ever pick Circle of the Moon it's Circle of the Land all the way. Where you get these, you can stack Haste with Moonbeam. And you don't want to haste yourself because Moonbeam doesn't work that well with haste, but you can get all the effects of Moonbeam simultaneously while hasting an allied target. Now let's talk about where the Druid ranks. I give the Druid base class a B tier, and that's just because of the limitations of its spell list. It has a very narrow way of playing, and the fact that Wildshape is almost useless in this patch, it just really hurts. I definitely could not upgrade the class. That said, I think if you go Circle the Land Druid, and why wouldn't you, and you use all these tricks like stacking Moonbeam with other concentration spells, using the Circlet of Fire, you do have a pretty good class on your hands. I've played to level 5 with 2 Druids now. If you go Circle of the Land, it's a pretty strong class. You bring a lot of damage, some really good control spells like Healing Word and Haste, and if you're willing to use your concentration, you can kind of pinch hit as a controller. It's kind of everything all in one class. So Circle of the Land, I am giving A tier. Circle of the Moon is RP tier right now, in my opinion. It's just not worth taking. You should always go Circle of the Land every time. To end, let me ask you a question that's really been bothering me lately. What is money? Economists have traditionally said that money is just a primitive technology to make barter more convenient, but anthropologist and historian David Graeber says it's actually a numerical representation of debt. Money is what we owe each other. And I like that because it makes sense of the tremendous debt that I owe my supporters on Patreon. To Thiel, Scott, and Gustavo, our newest members, thank you so much for joining, guys. Delighted to have you. To my core, Soul Servant, Kaio, Merrick, Carlos, Root One, Jason, Jeff, and Marchitar, thank you, guys. And of course, a special thank you to Aurelian, my #1 advisor on Baldur's Gate 3. I really appreciate your opinions. And to CA Castaway, the guy who started it all. Gentlemen, I won't let you down.